Hand over your license, registration, and phone.
Why do you need my phone?
This area is near Fort Bliss and energy infrastructure. There's a surveillance alert from Iran.
I'm just pumping gas.
I already explained why you're here.
Red and blue patrol lights reflected off the body of the Audi Q8 as Sheriff Douglas Whitfield of the El Paso County Sheriff's Office pulled his cruiser to a stop directly behind it at the Shell gas station along Interstate 10 on the outskirts of El Paso, Texas. The black woman in her mid-30s stood beside the pump, dressed in a dark blazer and business slacks, having stopped to refuel on her way home. She hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a red light, and hadn't broken any traffic laws. But to Whitfield, the sight of a black woman standing next to an SUV worth nearly $80,000 late at night, just a few miles from Fort Bliss Army Base, was enough to raise suspicion. He approached with his hand near the gun on his hip and said the area was close to a military installation and critical energy infrastructure. He mentioned recent alerts about Iranian intelligence surveillance activity and said information gatherers often watched places like highway gas stations. The woman kept her voice calm and repeated that she was only fueling up before heading home. Whitfield still demanded to check her phone for any images related to area infrastructure. She refused. Tension rose as a few customers inside the convenience store began looking out the glass windows. Whitfield said that if she didn't cooperate, he could detain her for further investigation. The woman looked straight at him and said he was making a serious mistake. What Whitfield didn't know was that the gas station's security cameras were recording the entire exchange, and the woman he had just accused of possibly being an Iranian spy was actually a federal agent. Within less than a day, video from that small parking lot would spread across the United States and turn what seemed like a routine stop into the beginning of a multi-million-dollar civil rights lawsuit that could end his career entirely. The woman standing beside that Audi Q8 was Nia Reynolds, a special agent with the FBI's Counterintelligence Division, working out of the FBI El Paso field office. The path that brought her to this position was far from short. Nia grew up in Atlanta in a family that always believed education was the only way to overcome the barriers society sometimes placed in front of black people. She earned a scholarship to Howard University, where she graduated with high honors before going on to Georgetown University Law Center in Washington, D.C. After becoming a lawyer, Nia began her career as a federal prosecutor, handling federal cases involving organized crime and transnational money laundering. It was there that she first encountered files related to foreign intelligence networks operating inside the United States. Her skill in financial analysis, patience in investigations, and ability to build airtight legal cases brought her to the attention of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. A few years later, Nia Reynolds officially joined the FBI and was assigned to the Counterintelligence Division, the unit responsible for monitoring foreign intelligence activities on U.S. soil. At the El Paso field office, she was a member of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, a coordinated effort between the FBI, DHS, and local law enforcement agencies to investigate national security threats. Nia's work often centered on complex cases, money flows moving through multiple countries, shell companies, and covert financial networks used to fund espionage or terrorism. In recent months, she had been part of an investigation into a suspicious transaction system linked to individuals connected to Iranian intelligence networks, a case that required hours of document review, transaction tracking, and coordination with multiple federal agencies. But even though her job directly involved protecting national security, there was one reality in life that Nia Reynolds could never completely escape: racial profiling. Over the years, she had experienced moments familiar to many African Americans. As a college student, she had been shadowed by store security in a high-end department store as if she were about to steal something. After becoming a lawyer and moving to a nicer neighborhood, she had been asked by a new neighbor if she had the wrong address, and on a few rare but memorable occasions, she had been pulled over by police for no clear reason other than driving a nice car in an area they didn't think she belonged. Those experiences were not isolated. In many parts of the United States, a successful black person could still be viewed with suspicion. An expensive car, an affluent neighborhood, or even a high-level professional job could sometimes become the pretext for others to question. Nia understood that reality clearly, but she had also learned to face it with the calm and discipline the FBI demanded of every agent. That day had started very early for her and was ending later than expected. The morning was a Joint Terrorism Task Force meeting where investigators shared information on suspicious financial transactions tied to entities in the Middle East. The rest of the day was spent reviewing documents and tracking money flows moving through shell companies across several states. When she left the FBI office in El Paso that evening, Nia just wanted to get home, take a hot shower, and rest for a few hours before returning to work the next morning. Her Audi Q8 turned into the Shell gas station on Interstate 10, a familiar stop on the way to her apartment. She had stopped there many times before, pump gas, grab a bottle of water, then keep driving home. That night was no different. She parked beside the pump, stepped out, and began fueling. But just minutes later, the patrol lights of Sheriff Douglas Whitfield appeared behind her car, and a situation began to unfold. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because of the assumptions Whitfield chose to believe from the very first glance. Nia Reynolds stood beside her Audi, completely unaware that this minor stop at a highway gas station was about to become one of the clearest examples of how prejudice can ignite a major mistake. Sheriff Douglas Whitfield spotted the black Audi Q8 the moment he turned into the Shell gas station lot along Interstate 10. The SUV was still very new, its paint reflecting the lights from the station canopy like a dark mirror. Beside the vehicle was a black woman in her mid-30s standing at the pump. The driver's door was still open, and from his position, Whitfield could see the faint glow of a laptop on the passenger seat inside the car. Those three details, a luxury SUV, a black woman, and an open electronic device in the vehicle, quickly came together in his mind to form a story. In recent weeks, Whitfield had heard numerous discussions and briefings about alerts concerning infrastructure surveillance. News about foreign intelligence networks had convinced him that threats could appear anywhere, even in ordinary places like a highway gas station. And in that moment, he decided the woman needed to be checked. Whitfield slowly drove his patrol car around the lot and stopped directly behind the Audi, blocking nearly the entire exit. His finger flipped the switch, and instantly the red and blue emergency lights came on, reflecting off the car body and the convenience store windows ahead. The flashing lights spread across the lot, causing a few customers inside the store to turn and look out. As Nia Reynolds bent to place the nozzle back into the pump, she saw the lights reflected on the car's paint and immediately knew what was happening. She straightened up, turned, and looked toward the patrol car that had just stopped behind her. No siren, no announcement over the speaker, but the patrol lights and the vehicle's position made it clear this wasn't just a passing car. This was a stop. Whitfield opened his door and stepped out. He approached her with firm strides, hand near the holster where his gun rested on his hip, a posture familiar to officers who believe they are approaching a potentially dangerous situation. When he stopped a few steps from Nia, the red and blue lights continued flashing behind him. "License and registration," Whitfield said. Nia replied, "Sheriff, may I ask the reason for the stop?" The question was delivered calmly, but it was also a basic legal question. Any lawyer or federal agent would know well. Whitfield didn't answer directly. Instead, his eyes swept over the Audi and back to her face. "What do you do for a living?" he asked. Nia frowned slightly. "I just asked the reason for the stop." Whitfield ignored the question. "Is this your vehicle?" he said, nodding toward the Audi. "Yes. A brand new Q8, Whitfield continued, his tone full of skepticism. "How did you pay for it?" Nia looked at him for another second. She had heard questions like this before, not in a formal investigation, but in situations where others saw the car and wondered how a black woman could possibly own it. "Sheriff, I'm still waiting for an answer to my question," she said. "Why was I stopped?" Whitfield exhaled lightly through his nose as if his patience was being tested. "I asked first," he said. "What do you do for a living?" Nia opened her wallet and pulled out her driver's license. "My name is Nia Reynolds," she said, handing him the card. "Here's my license." Whitfield took the card and looked down at it under the station canopy light. He read the name, studied the photo, then glanced up at her face as if comparing every detail. Nia returned to the car, opened the passenger door, and retrieved the registration from the glove box document holder. When she handed the paper to Whitfield, he took it and examined it longer than necessary. Everything matched. The registered owner was Nia Reynolds, address in El Paso, valid insurance, temporary tag in order. Everything was completely legal. But Whitfield didn't return the documents. He flipped the registration back and forth a few times, eyes narrowing. "These could be forged," he said finally. Nia looked at him, silent for a few seconds. "Sheriff," she said, voice still calm, "I have provided a valid driver's license and valid registration. I still haven't heard the reason you stopped me." Whitfield looked back at the Audi, then into the car through the open door. The laptop light on the passenger seat was still on. "What are you doing with a computer in your car?" he asked. "Checking work email," Nia answered. Whitfield shook his head slightly. "Really?" He folded the registration but kept it in his hand. An $80,000 car, an open laptop in a parking lot near a military installation, and you're telling me you're just checking email. Those words made the air between them heavier. Nia could clearly sense that the story in Whitfield's head had been written before he even stepped out of his patrol car, and now the stop no longer felt like a routine check. It had become an interrogation rooted in suspicion and prejudice. Whitfield still held her documents in his hand, eyes never leaving her face, as if waiting for some detail to mismatch and confirm what he had believed from the start. And Nia Reynolds stood beside her Audi, completely calm, but also fully aware that this confrontation was only just beginning. Whitfield still held Nia's driver's license and registration in his hand. He said that in recent weeks, law enforcement in the area had received alerts about espionage activity, particularly efforts to gather information related to infrastructure in military bases. He pointed toward the dark highway behind the gas station. "Fort Bliss isn't far from here," he said. "It's one of the largest military installations in the region, and this area also sits right along the corridor for the energy pipeline system running through West Texas." He looked at the Audi and then back at Nia. "Places like this are always considered sensitive targets," Whitfield continued, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had already convinced himself that the story he was telling made sense. He said he had observed Nia as his patrol car passed the lot. According to him, she had stood beside the vehicle for quite a while before he activated his lights. He said he saw the laptop open in the car, and that made him believe she might be taking notes or transmitting information elsewhere. He said that in many previous cases, information gatherers often started by photographing infrastructure, observing traffic, then sending data via electronic devices. Whitfield paused for a few seconds before making his next demand. "I need to check your phone," he said, "and the laptop in the car." Nia didn't answer immediately. Whitfield went on, "I also need to check inside the vehicle to make sure there's no device recording or transmitting data." At this point, his voice no longer sounded like a request. It sounded like an order. Nia looked at him for a moment before replying. "Sheriff," she said slowly, "you do not have probable cause to search my phone, my computer, or my vehicle." Whitfield raised an eyebrow. "You're refusing to cooperate in a national security investigation?" "I'm refusing an unlawful search," Nia replied. The exchange began drawing attention around them. A truck driver who had just finished fueling at the pump across the lot paused, leaned against his door and looked over. Inside the gas station convenience store, two college students standing near the glass door started paying attention to the flashing lights and the tense voices outside. One of them pulled out a phone, opened the camera, and began recording. Above them, the gas station's security camera mounted under the canopy quietly captured everything from a wide angle, recording every move Whitfield made and every response Nia gave. Whitfield seemed unaware or unconcerned that what he was saying was being recorded from multiple angles. He took another step toward Nia. "Do you know how Iranian intelligence operates overseas?" he asked. Without waiting for her to answer, he continued. "They often use cutouts, people who look completely normal, people who don't raise suspicion." He pointed at the Audi. "They scout sensitive locations first, take photos, make notes. Then the information gets sent back." Nia looked straight at him. "Sheriff," she said, voice still holding the same calm, "you're speculating." Whitfield shook his head. "I'm doing my job." "No," Nia said. "You're accusing me of being a spy without any evidence." Whitfield was silent for a second. "I see an expensive car, a person standing next to it with an open laptop and a location near a military base," he said. "I have reason to ask questions." Nia exhaled lightly. She knew exactly how situations like this usually played out. Once assumptions formed, every detail could be interpreted to reinforce that assumption. But she also knew something else. Every word Whitfield said right now was being recorded. "Sheriff Whitfield," she said clearly, "you just stated that you suspect me based on the car I drive, the location I'm in, and your assumptions about how intelligence networks operate." Whitfield stared at her. "That's right." Nia nodded slightly. "Then let me make one thing clear," she said. "What you're doing here is not a lawful investigation." She pointed toward her car. "This is racial profiling." Those words made Whitfield pause for a moment. But only for a moment. Then he tightened his grip on the registration paper he still hadn't returned. The air between them grew heavier as those around them continued to watch, phone still recording, and the patrol lights kept flashing in the Texas night. The confrontation at the Shell gas station had now gone far beyond a routine document check. It was turning into a situation that could bring far greater consequences than Sheriff Douglas Whitfield could imagine at that moment. Whitfield stood still for a few seconds after Nia said the words racial profiling. But the silence wasn't because he was reconsidering his actions. When he spoke again, his voice was harder than before. He said he had reasonable suspicion to continue the investigation, and that the location of the gas station, the expensive car, the open laptop in the vehicle, and the way Nia refused to cooperate were enough for him to ask questions. He folded the registration back up and kept it in his hand instead of returning it. "You're near a major military base and a critical energy infrastructure corridor," Whitfield said, "and you're refusing to let me check your electronic devices. To me, that's reasonable grounds to continue the investigation." Nia looked at him, still keeping her voice calm. "Reasonable suspicion doesn't give you the right to search my phone or personal computer," she said. Whitfield shook his head slightly. "If you continue to obstruct this investigation," he said, "I can impound this vehicle for further inspection." He nodded toward the Audi. "And if you keep refusing to cooperate, I can also arrest you for obstruction." Those words made the atmosphere in the parking lot even heavier. The truck driver standing on the other side of the lot had stepped a few paces closer. The two college students inside the convenience store were still filming through the glass. Whitfield seemed oblivious to the eyes around him. His attention remained fully on Nia Reynolds. "Sheriff," Nia said slowly, "I'm not obstructing any lawful investigation. I'm simply reminding you that you don't have probable cause to search my personal property." Whitfield crossed his arms over his chest. "You talk like a lawyer." "I used to be a federal prosecutor," Nia replied. Whitfield raised an eyebrow, but his reaction wasn't acknowledgement. Instead, he looked back at the Audi and said, "I've seen cases like this before. People who look completely normal, but are actually working for foreign intelligence." He turned to look straight at her. "And I'm still not convinced you're not one of them." Nia didn't answer right away. She knew that every word at this point could become part of a future record. "You're accusing me of being a foreign intelligence operative without any evidence," she said finally. Whitfield shrugged. "I'm investigating." Right then, a second patrol car turned into the gas station lot. Its headlights swept across the parking area before stopping behind Whitfield's vehicle. A young officer stepped out. The nameplate on his chest read Caleb Ortiz. Ortiz quickly scanned the lot, then walked over. He saw Whitfield facing Nia, the red and blue lights reflecting off both of them. "Sheriff," Ortiz said, his voice carrying a hint of hesitation. "Everything okay here?" Whitfield didn't turn right away. "I'm handling it," he said curtly. Ortiz stood still for a second, then looked at Nia. He recognized the tension in the way the two were standing opposite each other. He also noticed several people filming from the convenience store. Ortiz lowered his voice. "Do we have a problem here?" Whitfield answered for Nia. "Possible foreign surveillance involvement," he said. Ortiz looked at Nia, then at the Audi. He didn't say anything, but his eyes showed he was trying to make sense of the situation. Nia turned to Ortiz. "Deputy," she said calmly, "your sheriff just threatened to impound my vehicle and arrest me because I refused an unlawful search." Ortiz looked at Whitfield. "Sheriff," Whitfield cut him off. "I have reasonable suspicion," he said, "and she's refusing to cooperate." Nia looked at Ortiz. "What your sheriff is doing," she said, "could constitute a federal civil rights violation." Those words made Ortiz pause. He glanced toward the convenience store, where phones were still pointed at the lot. Whitfield seemed unconcerned by his subordinate's reaction. He took another step toward Nia. "You could make this simple," he said. "Just let me see the phone and laptop." "No," Nia answered. Whitfield clenched his jaw. "Then we'll do it the other way." The air around them grew even more tense as those nearby realized the confrontation showed no sign of ending. Whitfield still held Nia's documents in his hand, still stood blocking her from her car, and still believed he was in the right. And Nia Reynolds stood before him with the calm of someone who understood deeply the legal system she had spent years working inside. And as the phones continued to record every moment, this small traffic stop at the highway gas station was steadily turning into a situation that no one there could easily walk back from. Whitfield had just finished saying, "Then we'll do it the other way," when Nia Reynolds exhaled slowly. She had heard enough to understand that this conversation wouldn't end with ordinary reasoning. Sheriff Douglas Whitfield still stood blocking her from her Audi, still holding her driver's license and registration in his hand, and still believed he was investigating a national security threat. Nia looked at him for a few seconds before reaching into her jacket pocket. Her movement was slow and deliberate. "I'm going to get my wallet," she said, her voice calm to avoid adding tension. Whitfield immediately focused on the motion. His hand instinctively dropped a little closer to his holster. "Nice and slow," he said. Nia pulled out a dark leather wallet and opened it in front of him. Inside, next to her driver's license, was a card Whitfield hadn't seen before. She took it out and held it up. "Sheriff Whitfield," she said clearly, "I am Special Agent Nia Reynolds, FBI Counterintelligence Division." The red and blue lights behind Whitfield reflected off the metallic surface of the badge attached to the card. The seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation was clearly visible under the light. Whitfield stared at the card for several seconds, but instead of stepping back or changing his demeanor, he only frowned. He reached out, took the card, and examined it more closely. He flipped it over and back, inspecting the seal, photo, and badge number. A long moment of silence stretched out. Nia remained still, saying nothing more. Finally, Whitfield looked up. "Things like this can be fate," he said. His voice wasn't as certain as before, but the doubt was still there. Nia didn't appear surprised. "Sheriff," she said, "you can verify my identity right now." Whitfield didn't respond. Nia continued. "Call the FBI El Paso field office. The number is public information. They'll confirm who I am in less than a minute." Whitfield stared at her, then back at the card. "I've seen fake badges before," he said. "The internet sells plenty." Nia crossed her arms over her chest, still keeping her voice calm. "Then, make the call," she said. While the exchange continued, Deputy Caleb Ortiz, standing a few steps away, had seen the FBI credential when Whitfield held it up under the light. Ortiz stepped a little closer. "Sheriff," he said quietly. Whitfield didn't turn. Ortiz looked at Nia, then back at the card in Whitfield's hand. He had been with the sheriff's office for less than 3 years, but he had also attended a few joint training sessions with federal agencies. He recognized the FBI emblem and the way the credential was designed. He also recognized something else. If the woman in front of them really was a federal agent, this situation was heading in a very dangerous direction. "Sheriff, maybe we should." Ortiz began. Whitfield cut him off. "I'm handling it." Ortiz fell silent, but his eyes showed clear concern. On the other side of the lot, the truck driver still leaned against his door, watching intently. Inside the convenience store, the two students were still filming through the glass. One of them had stepped outside, phone held high. The gas station's security camera continued recording everything from above. Whitfield handed the credential back to Nia, but he still didn't return her license or registration. "Even if you work for the FBI," he said, "that doesn't change the fact that I'm still investigating suspicious activity." Nia looked at him. "You've just been given clear evidence of my identity," she said. Whitfield shook his head. "I haven't verified it yet." Nia nodded slightly. "Then make the call." Whitfield didn't. Instead, he turned to look inside the Audi once more, where the laptop still sat on the passenger seat. "I still need to check that computer," he said. Nia exhaled lightly. "Sheriff," she said, "I just told you I'm an FBI counterintelligence agent." Whitfield shrugged. "All the more reason to make sure you're not doing anything wrong." Those words made Ortiz look at Whitfield in disbelief. But Whitfield kept going. He took half a step toward the car. "Open the vehicle," he said. "No," Nia answered immediately. Whitfield turned back to her. "You're continuing to obstruct the investigation. I'm protecting my constitutional rights," Nia replied. The air around them grew even more tense as those nearby realized that even after her FBI identity was revealed, the stop still wasn't over. Whitfield still stood there, still blocking her path to her car, and still believed he had the authority to continue. And Nia Reynolds understood clearly that the situation had just entered a completely different phase one, where every word, every action, and every second captured on camera could become evidence in a far larger investigation than this small traffic stop. The tension in the lot hadn't eased when a gray SUV without patrol lights turned into the gas station from Interstate 10. The vehicle moved slowly past the rows of pumps and stopped behind the two patrol cars already parked. The door opened and a woman in her mid-50s stepped out. She wore a light jacket from the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. her stride quick and decisive. Captain Maria Delgado scanned the lot once, her eyes immediately settling on Whitfield Nia Reynolds in the Audi. The red and blue lights reflected off her face as she approached. Deputy Caleb Ortiz stepped aside as if relieved of a burden. Delgado stopped in front of Whitfield. "Sheriff," she said curtly, "what's going on here?" Whitfield answered immediately. "Possible infrastructure surveillance, I'm investigating." Delgado didn't react right away. She turned to look at Nia, and in the moment their eyes met, recognition appeared very clearly. She had seen this face before at a joint terrorism task force meeting a few months earlier at the FBI office in El Paso. Delgado turned back to Whitfield. "Sheriff, do you have any traffic violation?" Whitfield shook his head. "No." "Any stolen vehicle reports related to this Audi?" "No." Delgado nodded slowly. "Have you run the plates yet?" Whitfield didn't answer immediately. "I'm in the process of investigating," he said finally. Delgado looked straight at him. "Sheriff Whitfield," she said, her voice calm but firm, "do you have probable cause to detain this woman here?" Whitfield clenched his jaw. "I have reasonable suspicion." Delgado shook her head slightly. "No, you don't." She turned to Nia. "Agent Reynolds, I'm sorry about this." Nia nodded slightly but said nothing. Delgado turned back to Whitfield. "This stop is unlawful," she said. "You have no traffic violation, no stolen vehicle report, and no probable cause." She held out her hand. "Badge." Whitfield looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he just heard. "Captain?" Delgado cut him off. "Right now." Whitfield stood still for a few seconds, then slowly removed the badge from his chest and placed it in her hand. Delgado took it, turned to Ortiz. "Deputy, document this incident." Then she looked back at Whitfield. "You're suspended immediately pending internal investigation." Whitfield stood there, the red and blue lights reflecting off his face. Delgado pointed toward his vehicle. "Sheriff, leave the scene." Within just a few hours after the incident at the Shell gas station on Interstate 10, the video capturing the entire confrontation began spreading across social media. Images of Sheriff Douglas Whitfield accusing a black woman of being an Iranian spy, then continuing to detain her even after she presented her FBI credentials, quickly garnered millions of views. Major outlets like CNN, NBC, and the Texas Tribune picked up the story, turning the minor stop at a highway gas station into a national conversation about racial profiling and abuse of power. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office internal investigation concluded 6 weeks later. Whitfield was fired, his law enforcement certification revoked, and under Texas state rules for serious misconduct, he also lost all pension benefits after more than 2 decades of service. A few months later, Nia Reynolds filed a federal civil rights lawsuit named Reynolds v. El Paso County Sheriff's Office, alleging racial profiling, unlawful detention, and violations of federal civil rights law. Under pressure from the video evidence and media attention, El Paso County agreed to a $40 million settlement. The agreement required the department to implement mandatory anti-bias training, equip all officers with body cameras, and establish an independent oversight mechanism for traffic stops. The case quickly became a textbook example cited in law enforcement training programs across the United States about the cost when racial profiling replaces evidence and the law. If this story made you think, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other real cases about justice and accountability. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next story.